What's going on, guys? SeeJay here, and in today's video I wanted to talk a bit about multi-squad PvP, some of the teams that I think that you should kind of focus on or start thinking about on your roster to prepare for it, and sort of just like the design or layout that I'd expect the mode to look like, at least from its first inception into the game. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Alright guys, so let's talk multi-squad PvP. We know that that's most likely going to be the next mode we get in Lord of the Rings Heroes of Middle-earth. We don't really know what that's going to look like, but assuming they take a similar approach that currently exists in their other kind of competitive or competitor game of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, and some insights that they've already shared, I believe, at some point when they discuss multi-squad PvP as a mode being added to the game in the future, is they are going to have that whole offensive and defensive side to consider. So as you guys know, if you've been watching my videos, I've been playing a little bit of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. I haven't really dove into it too much. I haven't actually participated in much of the Grand Arena, but the Grand Arena is the same concept of multi-squad PvP. However, I think they're going to take it a bit further because they did say that they wanted it to be a mode that you're going to kind of spend time in every single day. And from my experience thus far, and I could be totally off topic here in regards to how Grand Arena works, but I set a defensive team and it's kind of like in limbo until a point in time that you then do attacking. So that wouldn't be great, right? Because if you just set a defense and then you kind of do nothing for a day or a few days, it's not a lot of content. You just kind of probably rinsing and reusing the same defensive team you already had built out for your team, at least for a long period of time, before maybe there's another team that you built and can replace. So that wouldn't be much to really add in terms of gameplay. So I'm hoping there's a little bit of like daily content regarding your offense and defensive attacks. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, the structure is going to be multiple team, right? That's the whole point of it. So I think at some point you'd have up to like 3 offensive and 3 defensive teams, maybe even 4 offensive and 4 defensive teams way down the road when the rosters are much larger in the game and there's more, there's just more factions to kind of pick and choose through, and your rosters are much more built out even for a free-to-play player. But in the beginning of the game, I would tend to think, given how little characters we have, maybe it's just like 2 offense, 2 defense, and not 3 offense, 3 defense off the rip. And I say that because you're only going to be able to use one of your characters on each of the sides on each of the teams. So you can't have like your Rivendell Elves be your offensive team and your Rivendell Elves be your defensive team. They can only be one or the other, right? And so if you had 6 total teams to build out, you're talking, half the current roster in the game for the most part. And the average player in raids, you need 5 built out teams, and most players don't have 5 built out raid teams. So the expectation to have like 6 ready to go PvP teams seems a little bit optimistic to me. I imagine most players in the game who've been playing probably since the beginning are now approaching maybe 2 built out teams that they've been maybe kind of grinding since day one. So you probably have like your Rohan trio, maybe the Isengard, and maybe like Road to Rivendell, and like that's probably your vast majority of built up of characters. Maybe Isengard you stopped and then you started farming Rivendell to kind of get that ball going because of Elrond. So then maybe Rivendell was getting close or just approached maxed out, or maybe like me waiting for this next Elrond event to come around to hopefully get your Elves to 7-star. But generally speaking, not a lot of people have raids that are running 3, 4, 5 complete teams, let alone 6 to choose from. And so I think having 6 in arena is a bit overkill, because you're going to have probably 2 or even 3 teams that are just like filler, right? Like just guys like this on my roster where you just have like a level 30 gear tier 3 or 4, just kind of filler junk, which like isn't fun, because if you're the attacker, you're going to be able to essentially say, oh, your best defense is going to go up against my worst offense. I'm going to lose that, but that's okay, because now I'm going to attack your second best team and your third best team with my second and first best teams, right? In order to win the series, essentially, right? And so if that was the case, like most teams are going to go kind of in the route of like a really bad team against a good team, and it's just like not really good experience. It's kind of just like a waste of a fight, because it's like going to be an absolute demolishing on your end. So anyways, I think they probably going to go 2 offense, 2 defense if I had to guess from the beginning, and then maybe later this year or early into next year you could potentially see you could see like a 3 offense, 3 defense type of build. But that would be my idea of how the game like the actual mode will look. Then if we wanted to talk about some teams to start preparing for as we're getting closer to this release, probably over the next couple of months, you're probably not going to have enough time, and you shouldn't really pivot what you're doing in the game, because raids are still going to be most likely the best bang for your buck in terms of putting resources into characters to get resources back. I don't really think multi-squad PvP is going to add a ton of additional value outside of maybe some additional gems, which gems are great, but like probably not enough gems for the average player for it to be like, I need to completely pivot my current plan of attack because raids was my focus. Now multi-squad PvP my focus. That's probably never going to be the case. Now, if, you know, of course, if you're like way up at the top, maybe the payout for the gems is certainly worth maybe pivoting. But at that point, you probably already have a pretty far developed roster that pivot isn't going to like really severely impact your raid progression. So speaking from like a free-to-play perspective, like low spender, because the majority of players are in that boat, and where I'd probably put some of the teams that you've already probably spent a lot of time in this game developing and then maybe pivoting at some point, but they're obviously much more developed than, you know, a character you maybe have put no time into. Like majority of players probably don't have any value put into like Dunlin or Mordor or Misty Mountain, besides maybe a character here or character there. Probably the majority of the players have a pretty well-developed Rohan trio, a pretty well-developed Isengard squad, your Elves, possibly now Goblins, because you're thinking about the legendary Thorin, so you might have some Goblin built out or starting to build out, and by the time multi-squad PvP comes out, you might have Goblins in at least decent spot to be used in a team for your arena team. Dwarves, of course, if you're already, you know, past the Goblin grind and you've got Thorin, that's just a fantastic team. Maybe you've been grinding Balin, because Balin's obviously just a really good plug and play character. Biffer, who's obviously easy to farm. There's a lot of characters that are probably on your hit list, like myself, as a low spender free to play player. Now, of course, if you're a spender and you've never really invested in Isengard, I tend to think Isengard's probably not going to be a really good arena team. But again, an Isengard team that's 5, 6, or 7 star with some, you know, some gear built onto them is still going to be better than plugging in a Gondor team that I believe would be a pretty good defensive team, but has no investment, right? Like they're just not going to have enough power to put up any kind of stand offensively or defensively, versus an Isengard squad that might be a 30 or 40,000 power team on your roster. So with that in mind, I would tend to say, if I had to give you a suggestion of a couple of teams offensively and defensively, first and foremost, just get it out, you know, just kind of get it out there. I believe both offensively and defensively, Elves and Dwarves are going to be very, very strong. No surprise there. They both have legendaries backed behind them. I would tend to think the Elves themselves are probably going to be a stronger, honestly, defensive team. So that's probably one of your defensive slots if you're going with the Rivendell squad. So probably your Rivendell 4, and then maybe start prioritizing Rumil when he becomes available. And it honestly should be whenever this next patch comes out. Rumil and Orphan should be immediately available whenever we get an update at some point from CG. I kind of made a video of this in the past on my sort of, you know, like master sheet, and they were kind of due to be available at the beginning of January based off just average timing that characters have been released in this game. And we're like a month delayed on those characters. Like, honestly, they could release upwards of all, like Rumil, Orphan, and the entire Dol'Guldur as farmable characters in one update, one patch, because at the end of this month, I had all of those characters being close to or not, like, it already farmable. Like, they should be farmable. I think maybe just Charo Reco ends up being like early February, based off like that 60 to 70 day sort of window that majority of characters have been kind of marqueed into released. But as soon as Rumil becomes farmable, he's like a top 5, top 10 character in my opinion in the game. So I would start farming him ASAP, and then just get him up to a point, you know, as you're waiting for multi-squad PvP to come out, to be a very good 5th character for your defense. You could go Nary Mary. She's probably still pretty good too to add as a defensive option. And then if you are going offense, you could just go with the full 5, you know, so the Rivendell 5. Maybe you could sub out, you know, for Legolas. Legolas has a lot of DPS, so you kind of have options there. But Rivendell is certainly going to be easily a number 1, number 2 team in PvP. I don't really foresee that being probably not the case. And then, as I mentioned, Dwarfs, again, they're also an option as your team of offense or defense. You'd slightly build them, I think, a little bit differently depending on how you take that approach. Assuming you have Thorin and you go offense, because Thorin is a beast on the offensive side because of his ability to really just hard target, characters and take them down. So if you're really going after that Elrond, he really makes it a little bit easier with his abilities. I think Philly Killy are going to be always on your offense defense. I think you probably always would run Thorin too, offense or defense, since he just offers, a lot of utility and just a lot of damage. I think if you're running defense, you're going to go Gimli. If you're running offense, you probably go Balin. I think Balin, if he's not on your team for Dwarves, is probably a plug and play character on another team that might just have not enough good built out characters to kind of flex in as just like a really good plug and play character. But I would put the Dwarves also with the Rivendell as a really solid offense and or defensive team. So those would be like immediately 2 offense or 2 defensive teams. I would probably put Dwarves as your offense, Rivendell as your defense, in my opinion. So you'd have 1 offense, 1 defense sort of called out right now. And then if we're kind of going past that, I think another good team, and again, people who are probably hard focusing to get Thorin in his next go around, Goblins are an amazing offensive arena team. Great Goblin and his leadership ability is insane with that additional attack, and I believe healing, I think is what it is. Actually, I forget what is Great Goblin. He has that Goblin's Fury leadership ability that's really, really good for the team. So it offers focus and damage, and it stacks a lot every time a goblin dies. And goblins are super annoying because they die and they kind of send out their little shitter character, right? So this is a great offensive team in my opinion because they do a lot of damage. They have decent sustain with a lot of lifesteal, and the Great Goblins like leadership is just fantastic for this team as they're kind of dying and then adding another character that can attack and just kind of keep pummeling, the opponent. So I would put them as a very good option for an attacking team, especially since, again, I think the majority of the players are probably putting efforts, as you see in myself here, of building out the Goblins because you want Thorin on his next event. So you probably have at least a decently built out Goblin squad that might be able to be a team you'd consider as a multi-squad, probably like 4th team. Again, if it goes up to 6, like, you probably have more investment in them than a lot of other teams in the roster right now. Another good team, honestly, and they're not fully built out for probably most, is going to be your Rohan. So Rohan, they're actually a good team as a whole, like not a lot of people, including myself, have them as a full squad. Eldred's pretty bad, honestly. I don't think his kit's that great. Wilfwyn is not actually too bad. She does pump a lot of damage. So if you were considering like a Rohan team, she might be somebody worth considering putting a little bit of investment into to have 4 out of the 5 Rohan squad members together. But if you're like most others and you have the Rohan trio, I think they're a fantastic attacking team that you could plug in with probably one of your large characters. So either like Gruhur the Brute, if you've been farming him on the web store, or God's Ironhide, either one would be like a nice like 4th edition alongside probably another DPS. And if you didn't have a defensive team, I think you could also use this squad with maybe another tank to kind of be that annoying sort of duo tank concept where like you're constantly provoking and taunting from the ability for the the attacking team to be able to focus who they actually want to hit, because they kind of just keep switching the taunts around. So they do kind of have the ability to sort of flex into an offensive or defensive team, but I would tend to say the Rohan trio plus, a large character alongside a 5th best available character on your roster could be a very good attacking offensive team for your roster. Assuming again, you probably have these guys built out. And then I think they're a little bit of a sleeper pick. They're not great in arena today as a team standalone, but if you built them out to be a arena team, they have so many poisons, bleeds, speed, turn meter manipulation. I actually think a built out Haradrim team, which you might have because again, Haradrim is a top notch, probably top 3, definitely top 5 raid team. So if you put resources into them, like I have myself, they're probably not really bad to number 2 or number 3 offensive team. I think if you're putting the abilities out that you want to put out on certain characters, a lot of that stacking poison, a lot of that turn meter manipulation will definitely add up in arena when you're the one sort of not having like a live action fight, but rather you're sort of telling everybody what you want to happen. So I actually think Haradrim wouldn't be a bad offensive team either, and you probably have some resources already built out into this team, assuming, you know, you're kind of thinking raids and teams that you want to, you know, put into them. So the problem with them is like they kind of need to be built out. Just like in raids, they kind of need to be built out in PvP, because you can't be missing your attacks. You can't be missing some of the abilities that are core to their team to be as strong as possible, like always inflicting the poison when you are hitting crits and having strong crit chance to make the crits happen, etc. So they're a bit of an investment, but I do think they're also a decently strong offensive team. And then kind of round it out, I don't think they're that good, but I do think you could probably say Road to Rivendell would not be a horrible team to have as an offensive squad. They're pretty easy to beat defensively. I generally can take my current offensive for Rivendell 4 with Gauze and take out like 8, 10, 12,000 power stronger Road to Rivendell defensive teams with not too much of a problem, because once you kind of take out their DPS, they don't do anything. But if you have them built out, you have all of their passives, you know, all of their abilities kind of put in, you got that constant counterattack happening. Frodo hits like a truck. I think they could be at least somewhat viable as an offensive team. But again, I wouldn't go out of your way to invest in them unless you've already fully invested into this team. Then they might be a good kind of secondary, you know, C tier type offensive team to consider. And then for defense, so the two that I really wanted to talk about, so Gondor is like about as defensive as it gets, right? Their team is all about defense, block mitigation, kind of just soaking that damage. I think they're a fantastic team, fully as a squad built out for defense. I don't think a lot of people have Gondor, but if you do have Gondor, I do think that they would be a solid Elves as your number 1, Gondor as your number 2 for your 2 defensive teams. And then if there's a third, then probably your Dwarves. They're fantastic. They really are. They are, if you have them built out, they are a good team. The problem is probably not a lot of people have them built out because they've just more or less recently been one of the groups of characters that have moved to farmable. And granted, they are pretty farmable. Like Arundel and Sergeant Ara have been there since the beginning of the game. And then your kind of core 3 here, Faramir, Boromir, Denethor, are Guild Node, one of the store shops. I can't remember off the top of my head if it's Arena or Guild. I think it's Arena. And then Denethor is a hard node. So farmable team, but a lot of people have already been spending a lot of time investing into certain characters that already exist and probably haven't pivoted to them. They're one I'd like to consider pivoting to at some point in time. I just haven't made that switch yet because, again, I'm really heavily invested into finishing Rivendell and Haradrim before I kind of make that next move. And then the last one, we got some time here before they're going to be anything, but Dol'Guldur, I think if there's a character that gets released in the near future, and if you started considering or already have built out this 3, if there's a way to build Black Beast into being more protected with like a taunt or some way to just really avoid being able to just hard target him, they are a very difficult team to take down with kind of like a sharing health pool and just like their whole design. I think they'd be a fantastic defensive team once they're built out, but it really just depends on what that next Dol'Guldur character or Nazgul character in general looks like, the next 2 that they add to the game. So that is sort of like a long-term consideration for your team. And if you sort of have like the additional resources, start thinking about just specifically PvP, like they are pretty good. I mean, even actually they're not terrible in the raids either in some of the chapters, but they're not farmable yet. They will be soon. But again, if they release them as farmable with Rumil and Orphan, you're talking 5 characters that you probably don't have the resources like hard pivot and start farming all of them. So I would certainly prioritize, in my opinion, Rumil, because he's just such a good plug and play character regardless. And then again, it's your choice if you wanted to start thinking about them long term. But those would be the kind of my thoughts, processes, and like the teams and where I'd sort of place them offensively and defensively. So let me know what you guys think, what you think the mode will look like on release. When do you think we're going to get it? Are we going to hear anything today? That's another big question of the day. So anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.